armed with passion and bubbles. And a strong message for the president. Members and allies of the LGBTQ+ community made their way from Washington Circle Thursday night, pausing, of course, for much-needed dance breaks before arriving at the Kennedy Center loud and proud.
We're here because Donald Trump, in typical Trump fashion, has done some shady maneuvering to get rid of the board at the Kennedy Center and essentially install himself as dictator of the arts.
President Trump has said moving forward, drag shows will be a no-go at the Kennedy Center.
We're not going to let people steal our joy.
Tara Hoot, a popular drag queen in the district, believes she should be board president.
I think, why not me? I'm the people's princess, darlings, and the Kennedy Center is a place for everyone.
It's happening. President Trump is officially taking back our culture. The Kennedy Center, which the Trump administration has taken over, firing all of their woke executives, the center has announced that all Pride Month celebrations have been officially canceled. The events were part of what's called the Kennedy Center's Tapestry of Pride programming, which had been scheduled to coincide with this summer's World Pride Festival celebrating LGBT rights. But those events, according to the AP, have been canceled. Now, Rick Grinnell, who's the interim executive at the Kennedy Center, he's clarified that the Kennedy Center itself didn't cancel any events. They're just requiring that all their shows and events stop losing money and then stick taxpayers with the bill. And so it's more the organizers of these events that are the ones pulling them, not the Kennedy Center itself. However you want to spin it, Pride Month looks to be a thing of the past for the Kennedy Center. And let's just say that the ultra-left-wing patrons of that center are not very happy that taxpayers are asserting their cultural sovereignty over these gentry liberal piggy banks. For example, you may have seen this.
Kill that light!
Yeah, that's the gentry liberal clientele at the Kennedy Center booing our vice president. But let's be clear, they're not booing Trump or Vance, they're booing us. They're booing taxpayers who they've lived off of rent-free, as it were, for decades. And now we're simply demanding accountability from these gentry liberals. For example, when Rick Grinnell took over the Kennedy Center a couple of months back, he fired over a dozen executives. And when he did so, the top 5 executives, we found out, were making a total of $2.5 million a year in salary. One of them, the head of the Kennedy Center proper, was making over $1 million a year. And to add insult to injury, the Kennedy Center was in the red. Grinnell says they were completely out of money, despite hundreds of millions of dollars going to the center over the last 5 years alone. In fact, you'll love this. It's being reported that under Grinnell's leadership, the Kennedy Center has saved $10 million in staff reductions alone. The Kennedy Center basically got doged in more ways than one. We're not just saving money, we're saving our culture. That is what's really going on here, and I'm going to show you exactly how. But first, do you ever wonder how people like Nancy Pelosi seem to know exactly when to buy certain stocks? How politicians seem to have secret knowledge of what's going to do well in the market? Well, it's all insider trading. Pelosi and her cronies have been getting away with it for years. But guess what? You and I actually have access to that very same inside information. Thanks to a little SEC loophole, we can track what the big corporate CEOs are buying up in real time, and then we can just ride their coattails to financial success, legally, ethically. Once you learn the secret of the trade, you're in. Now, to do that, you got to join me, along with my good friend and trading expert, Ross Givens, this Thursday, May 8th at 3 p.m. Eastern. Ross is the real deal, gang. His insider tips have led to returns of over 200%, and some have hit as high as nearly 1,500%. It's going to be absolutely huge, but seating is limited. Click the link below and snag one of those remaining online seats. This is going to change your life, gang. You don't want to miss it. Click on that link below right now. In the midst of the growing backlash against wokeness, there's been a very noticeable pushback against LGBT pride displays in particular, as we recently saw with the latest law passed in Utah that bans the rainbow flag from being flown in all public buildings and schools throughout the state. And this growing backlash appears to be a mass response towards deliberate efforts by the woke left at changing our cultural symbols. Now, we're starting to get some scholarship on this question of what LGBT activism actually entails in relation to other emancipatory movements here in the United States. The University of London scholar Eric Kaufman is doing a lot of work in this. And basically, he argues LGBT rights today is inextricably linked to what Kaufman and others call cultural socialism. You might want to write that down. I mean, we more commonly refer to it as wokeness, but the key here with cultural socialism, well, it's twofold. This is what you have to get. There are two things about cultural socialism that I think once you get, ends up making a lot of sense of why you're seeing such a massive backlash against LGBT pride displays and so forth. First, cultural socialists believe that historically marginalized groups, so these are people marginalized because of their race, their gender, their sexuality, they have to have equal outcomes in order for our society to be considered just and equitable. So whether that's money, power, affluence, career, marriage, whatever, that equity, and that's the key term here. It's not merely an equality of opportunity. It's an equity of outcome that needs to be the overall concern for a just society. So that's the first tenet of cultural socialism. And secondly, what's key here is the belief that those who have been marginalized and oppressed, they've been excluded not by an economic system. So that's what the Marxists of old would argue. They've been excluded rather by cultural norms, cultural narratives, cultural symbols. So this is where we get the notion of cultural Marxism from. Cultural Marxists or cultural socialists would basically argue that the words we use, the way we teach history in our schools, the way we name buildings, the way we organize our calendar and the holidays we celebrate, these are all subtle means by which we intentionally or unintentionally discriminate against and disenfranchise these groups. And justice requires that we redefine the entirety of our culture and things like our calendar and how we teach history and sexual relationality in our schools in order to include these otherwise disenfranchised groups. So cultural socialism is a cultural revolution in its fullest historical sense. This is just as radical as anything Mao would advocate. But besides the radicalness of the cultural change that's being proposed or enacted in cultural socialist endeavors, there's a very real vitriol, a venom entailed in this that voters are responding to and reacting against, pushing back against. The widespread concern here is that cultural socialism, or wokeness as it's more commonly referred to, sanctifies, it makes sacred these historically marginalized groups, these racial, gender, sexual identity groups. And that sanctity, in turn, has formed a new kind of caste system that scholars like Joel Kotkin at Chapman University refer to as neo-feudalism, where these sanctified groups are given special rights and privileges. Whereas at the same time, those who are now deemed as guilty of historical oppressions, the oppressor groups, namely white heterosexual men, are now subject to incessant stigmatization, being constantly accused of racism, patriarchy, sexism, and the like. So today, disparaging and derogatory things are openly said about, again, say, white Christian men that could not possibly ever be said openly about any other identity group. And we've seen this of late, of course, happening to Jewish students on college campuses by pro-Palestinian demonstrators. It's the same kind of stigmatization. So more and more people are recognizing that cultural socialism does not solve discrimination or oppression. It simply inverts it. It replaces one exclusionary caste system for another and is thereby guilty of perpetuating the very injustice it purportedly resolves. That, I think, is what people are ultimately pushing back against here. People aren't pushing back against inclusion or tolerance or multiculturalism or multiracialism. They're pushing back against what they see as a very aggressive and vitriolic form of reverse discrimination, where the justification defining our cultural symbols is rooted in the justification, I should say, of redefining our cultural symbols is rooted in the incessant stigmatization of significant portions of our population. And they've had it. And they're pushing back. They're tired of the stigmatization. They're tired of having the fingers pointed at them as evil freaks in their own home, their own country. And Trump is the answer. Trump is their avenger. So the bougie gentry liberals at the Kennedy Center can boo and whine all they want. Trump is gaining control on behalf of taxpayers, not only our national fiscal health, he's taking back control of our culture as well. By the way, click on the link in the description below to get all these articles and tweets I reference throughout my videos emailed to you each and every day. You're going to love it. We want you to have the best resources out there to convince your family and your friends of this new MAGA super age that's rising here.